Good morning, anatomy class. We officially got our stay-at-home orders, so guess what I'm doing? Staying at home. So we could be at school, but, it's kind of nice to be teaching at home. And we're going to start Module 14 on the respiratory system. That's the third to last module. We only have two more left, and that is the urinary and the reproductive system. So we are on a fast track to closing down the year, and I'm going to have to take a couple calls within this because it's about 9:20 when I'm recording this, and kids are going to be calling me right and left, so it's going to be interrupted. So here's our first interruption. Alright, let's get started. I'm going to try and keep myself away from the picture here. But anyway, the respiratory system. First mention, Genesis. I'm pulling out the NLT. That's a New Living Translation. Watch out. Could stand for like, I don't know, never live translation or something, if you're a KJV person. But anyway, the book quoted this one, so I'm quoting the book. And he breathed the breath of life into man's nostrils, and man became a living soul, or a living person. First mention of the respiratory system way back in Genesis. The respiratory system is a set of organs that allows the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide throughout the body. It functions externally and internally. The external function is the actual exchanging of air. So it's where you steal the environment's oxygen and you give back carbon dioxide. And internally, your cells swap out waste for oxygen. And so externally, you're dealing with the environment. Internally, you're dealing with the individual cell swapping waste for oxygen. Oxygen that it needs to do what it needs to do. So this would be internal respiration. Now, the respiratory system has a lot of different functions. I've tried to name them all with an ing to make it kind of streamlined. This will be an essay question on your test, but fear not. I think that we're going to be staying at home for the rest of the year, so you probably don't have to memorize all these things. What are the 6 functions of the respiratory system? It supplies oxygen, disposes carbon dioxide. That one's the most obvious. We call that oxygenating. Filters inspired air, filtering or filtration. It's very important. If we didn't filter air, all the things that are in air would get in our bodies. Sometimes we don't want that. Particularly because bacteria, viruses, fungal spores, lots of things float around in the air, but not in a high enough concentration to hurt us. But their concentration is enough to hurt us if we don't have filtered air. Sounding, obviously, we want to produce sound. Smelling, it contains receptors for smell, neurologically known as olfaction. We get that from the olfactory nerve, the first cranial nerve. It rids the body of excess water, vaporizing. If you go out on a very chilly day, now we don't have too many of these in Florida, but you can see your breath, right? You see the vapor leaving your body, and that's good. It also moisturizes parts of your throat, mouth. It also helps regulate blood pH. We're going to talk about blood pH later. That seems kind of strange how our respiratory system monitors how acidic our blood is or how basic it is. But it does. Breathing, pulmonary ventilation consists of 2 cyclic phases. You have inhalation and exhalation. We're going to reference these. Inhalation is where you take in gases into the lungs. Exhalation is where you take gases out of the lungs. It's also called inspiration and expiration. But those are lesser used now because, you know, expiration kind of means like expired milk. But anyway. And here are some of the main players. You have the nose and the mouth. Both lead to the trachea. The trachea leads to the bronchioles. The bronchial tubes, those lead to the lungs, which lead to the tinier facets of the lungs. And you see underneath the diaphragm, which allows for the expansion of the chest cavity. And we're going to talk about its vacuum and things in a couple slides. Divisions of the respiratory system, we divide it into the upper and lower respiratory tract. The upper tract contains the nasal cavity, or the nose, the sinuses, which 6 of them surround your nasal cavity, and the pharynx, the upper part of what we would call the throat. The lower respiratory tract contains the larynx, your voice box, so to speak. So right about here, the trachea, the tube going down to your lungs, the bronchi in the lungs. And of course, they are separated right at this point in your throat where the pharynx and larynx meet. Anything pharynx or above is upper. Larynx or below is lower. You also have an external nare, known as a nose, and that's a unique way to say nose. Strangely, in Philadelphia, we used some improper English. I don't know if this is used elsewhere, but we, instead of using the words nostril, left and right nostril, we said left and right nose, but you only have one nose. I don't know whether that's just terrible colloquialism or what. It's divided in half by the nasal septum. It separates the two halves. You have a septum in your heart, of course. Septum just means to separate. Your paranasal sinuses. Para means like beside or by. Nasal, of course, nose. Sinuses, where air is warmed, filtered out through cilia. And we should know this word cilia because we've used it a couple of times. Cells have cilia. They're fine hairs used for movement. And these are also used for movement. It's used for the movement of pathogens kind of outside of the air into these little hairs. And once a pathogen connects with the hair, your nose will swell with mucus to kill off that pathogen. So if your nose is kind of clogged and mucousy, your body's actually trying to do you a favor. And you see a couple of different things here. The nares, the sinuses, and the pathway it takes into the pharynx. We're going to talk about these different parts of the pharynx. The pharynx is the common space used for the respiratory and digestive systems. So, this is where the pharynx and the larynx are highly different. The pharynx brings both air and food into your body. However, it splits off into two different factions. It splits off into the larynx and the esophagus. And so you definitely don't want to get food into your larynx. We used to say that the food went down the wrong pipe, though that doesn't necessarily carry with it the exact meaning of what's happening. The pharynx is common space for respiratory and digestive systems. It originates posterior to the nasal and oral cavities and extends inferiorly to the level of the bifurcation of the larynx and the esophagus. Wow, it's a lot of words to say. It separates into two different things. It's a common pathway for both air and food. and it has 3 sections. The nasopharynx is where the nose meets the pharynx. It contains the pharyngeal tonsils, also known as the adenoids. These aid in the body's immunological defenses. You have the oropharynx, which you can see in this diagram here. The nasopharynx only comes in contact with air that passes through the nose. However, the oropharynx, oro is a prefix used for the mouth. It comes into contact with air both from the nose and from the mouth. You see that the mouth, the air that you breathe in the mouth, it doesn't actually have any sinuses it passes through. So if you actually breathed in droplets that got you sick, odds are you breathed it in through the mouth because the nose would find and filter it. Not always, but it is safer to breathe through your nose than it is through your mouth. The oropharynx contains the palatine tonsils, but really it only has 2 tonsils, whereas the air breathed through your nose goes through 6. Laryngopharynx, sorry, the larynx and the pharynx is a bottom section which divides into the esophagus and the trachea, it should say. And that's the laryngopharynx. And this is where we're going to end today in our first part, what the voice box is. The voice box of the body is the larynx, divided into the true and the false vocal cords. Just like you have true and false ribs, it's not saying that these vocal cords don't do anything. It's just that they aren't as complete in their manufacturing, and definitely not as effective as at producing sound. The thyroid cartilage, you can see the thyroid cartilage right here, makes up the framework of the Adam's apple. And the passageway through the true vocal cords is called the glottis. Now, since this is a cross section, we cannot see the glottis, but there is a pathway ranging through these, which carries air to and from the lungs. You can also see the epiglottis, which I didn't even mention. The epiglottis is a flap which closes off the airway to the lungs when you're eating. And so if the body detects that you're trying to swallow food, the epiglottis closes off the pathway to the lungs through the trachea. And when you're trying to speak, the epiglottis opens up to allow air to come through here, through the thyroid cartilage, the vocal cords, and into the trachea. Sound is made by closing the glottis, blowing air past the true vocal cords, causing them to vibrate. And, of course, the vocal cords have a lot to do with how you sound. Volumes controlled by the loudness of the sound, changed by the amount of air forced through the true vocal cords. So if you expirate more, or exhale more air through the lungs and in through the vocal cords, you're going to produce more sound. The pitch is determined by how tense you make your vocal cords. Now, your vocal cords naturally have a size to them and a thickness. Those who have larger, thicker vocal cords have a lower voice. So if you have someone with a super low voice, they actually have an abnormally large vocal cord. But if you have kind of a squeaky voice, it's because your vocal cords are smaller. And you really don't determine that. Your body determines the size of the vocal cords actually through your genetic code, and not much of through what you do. I have a call here. I'm actually going to get back to this lecture because I'm at 15 minutes. And since I have the free version of this software, it is not allowing me to record more than 15 minutes. Okay, see ya.